How's it going, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and got a great deal of very interesting information to share with you guys today. But of course, before we do, I want to go ahead and get to some of the channel housekeeping. So, those of you who are here, I don't see anybody yet in the live chat, but those of you who are here, I want to say shalom and thank you very much for being here. If you're here, please remember to like and share this video. Please get it shared to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. Of course, there is no need for a message without an audience to hear it, so we certainly do appreciate you getting this out to all those different social media platforms, whether it be Gab, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it happens to be. It's all definitely very much appreciated. Now, with that being said, of course, I want to also recommend that you guys get a Gab account or a Parler account if you prefer. But if you're amongst those who use Twitter, definitely consider hopping on alternative social media platforms. MeWe is another good one if you are a Facebook user. But regardless, we definitely want to recommend people use some of these alternative social media platforms as a way of fighting for free speech. It's the only real way that we ever will, see improvement in free speech online. And of course, I don't mean free speech is legally defined, because legally, um, the excuse me, what the First Amendment is referring to is simply the ability of the government to restrict your speech. So obviously a company can do what they want. That doesn't mean that they should do what they want, right? A lot of people tend to think just because a thing is legal, that means it's good, or just because a thing is bad, it should be illegal. Neither of those is true. Um, so when we, are fighting for free speech online, we are fighting for a cultural thing and not a legal thing. But nonetheless, how are we going to achieve that cultural thing? Well, by using alternative social media platforms and making sure that those who do not actually give us the right to speak our minds on their platforms don't have us on their platforms, right? Um, just 1 second. I got a message here that I got to respond to. Anyways, while you're there, by the way, if you are going to go there, please consider following your boy. I am at the Synagogue as far as my tag name is concerned. So if you're on Gab, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Parler, if you're on Minds, at the Synagogue is how you'll find me. Facebook as well. They have different display names basically always, because I like to have fun with that kind of thing. But nonetheless, as far as the actual, the way you would find me, the tag name, it's going to be the Synagogue every time. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely do consider following there, retweeting this, or re-gabbing, reparlering, whatever, right? And maybe even giving your boy a tag, right? Don't really have anything as far as announcements and stuff like that is concerned, because we don't tend to have announcements, excuse me, on this channel. At least it's a little bit too small for that at the moment. At some point, obviously, we're going to, hopefully be a little bit bigger than we currently are. But at the moment, there's just, it's a small channel, right? We got 49 subs on this channel, significantly smaller than the 776 over on the other channel. And I'm sure there's even some people who watch this channel who don't watch the other channel at all. Like, for example, longtime watcher Cryptomaria. I don't believe that Cryptomaria does watch the others. And the point is just to say that, announcements tend to come later when you have more to do. But regardless, if any of you guys find this content to be edifying, find this content to be good, find this content to be something that needs to get out to other people, find it something that I should be, that I have made worthy of turning into a career, right? Then you can actually help do that. And the way you can help do that is by giving either to the Patreon or to the PayPal. Patreon is, of course, the subscription-based service. So if you're interested in giving me a certain sum, however much you feel comfortable with every month, you can certainly do that. Links are going to be posted here in the live chat momentarily. And if you are still interested in helping me actually get this out and make this into a career and all that kind of stuff, but maybe not interested in doing it monthly, there is also the PayPal where you can give single payments, again, as much as you want. I don't do the tiered thing. I want to make sure people are giving whatever they're comfortable with and nothing more or less. So, but nonetheless, if you're interested in the one-time donation, you can certainly do that as well. Again, links will be in the live chat here shortly, and I will remind everybody about all this good, fun advertising kind of stuff at the end. Which reminds me, by the way, real brief advertising moment for myself. So for people who want to advertise their own channels, advertise their own companies, advertise their own products, obviously advertisement is one of the primary ways that these kinds of podcasts make money. So definitely consider hitting me up. And if your product is one that I believe is good, if your platform is one that I believe is worthy of getting out there, and of course, the same for me, right? I wouldn't want you to advertise on somebody you disagree with, but nonetheless, um, let's talk, right? And let's talk about potentially seeing, whether it be this channel or the other, seeing about getting those kinds of things set up. I also want to at some point get transitions and merch and stuff like that. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. But nonetheless, trying to plan for that kind of stuff. It's the whole YouTube grind is incredibly frustrating, if I'm being honest with you. Namely because you never really get constructive criticism. Now, not never. There is a longtime watcher of the other channel. Her name's Laura. Absolutely wonderful person. And one of the things that's most wonderful about her is she doesn't just subscribe to my Patreon, but she also says, "Hey, this was really good. Keep doing it. Hey, this is a topic I'd like to hear about. Hey, this was really bad. I don't think it's a good thing." You know what I mean? And that's the kind of criticism that I thrive on, that this kind of a platform thrives on, right? But it's difficult to find people like that, right? It's difficult to find people who are interested in contributing. It's difficult to find people who have constructive criticism. Most of the time, it's just insults, or "you're wrong because Christian," "you're wrong because conservative," right? Or even constructive praise, frankly, right? When a lot of people say, it's like, "Hey, man, doing a good job." Don't get me wrong, appreciate you, love you, but why, right? Like, what about this is good? What gets you to tune in? And that makes the whole grind frustrating. But nonetheless, obviously, um, we're going to try and figure this out at some point. I do want to do this as a career. I believe that the content we provide here is at least reasonably decent. And I hope you guys agree. Nonetheless, let's get into the pre-article portion of this conversation today. And that's just a brief update on the Supreme Court potential ruling. I say potential ruling because it hasn't actually happened yet. But everybody's talking about this leak with the Supreme Court that has said, basically, obviously this is a very paraphrased version of what the document is discussing, but the long and short of it is it would repeal Roe v. Wade. If this decision did actually come out in a legally binding manner, then Roe v. Wade would officially be repealed. It has not yet actually occurred. So far, we've only had a leak of the decision, which has caused an absolutely massive deal of controversy. The update I wanted to give, though, is that it has been communicated by the court that the draft is not final, which, of course, is something we were talking about on Tuesday anyways, right? We don't want to get too excited about this because it's very possible that this does not happen. It's very possible that this ends up being a gigantic nothing burger. However, obviously, we want to hold out a little bit of hope, be praying for this, actually coming to fruition, and us seeing the repealing of Roe v. Wade. That said, though, that's obviously not the thing you want to hear, because basically what Chief Justice Roberts was saying when he said this was subject to change is that the decision is not final, right? He's not talking about small details being subject to change, although that fits into fits under the umbrella of what he's saying. But the main point he's trying to hammer home is the decision is not final. The votes are not yet cast. The Rubicon has not been crossed. So just wanted to give you guys that brief update before we get into the articles here. And then let's go ahead and do that. And again, shalom to anybody who is here. Please remember to like and share the video. So, the first thing we're going to be talking about is faith leaders share the bed with gay leaders again. And of course, for those of you who've been paying attention, not only to the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches and the Mormons, but also the big evangelical churches, and a lot of different Jewish synagogues and stuff like that, you would know that this is not terribly surprising. Actually, it seems to be the case that a large majority of religious leaders, um, or at least a large portion of them, whether or not it's a majority, I guess I don't know, but a large portion of religious leaders out there have abandoned their scriptures, have abandoned their traditions, and have instead decided to follow the wokery going around. um, and the gay issue is no exception there, or provides no exception there, I guess I should say. But some of you may not be aware of how bad the problem is or how increasingly bad the problem is. And so, of course, you have shows like the Watchdog to come and talk about it. So we're going to go ahead and do that. This is a relatively old article, roughly a week old, but it sort of is describing, in this particular case, the Mormons, but also some other big evangelical groups, which are now actually coming out in support of the LGBTQ agenda, which of course is directly contrary to their scriptures, and in my opinion is a sign of certain things to come, which we will get to. This is from Deseret News, April 27th of 2022, which was roughly 9 days ago, as this was on May the 6th, 2022. At any rate, Latter-day Saint leaders and LGBTQ advocates deepen their relationship on Washington, D.C. temple tour. Again, Latter-day Saint leaders and LGBTQ advocates deepen their relationship on Washington, D.C. temple tour. Learn why the Church of Jesus Christ, which is what the Mormons, of course, call themselves, is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? At any rate, invited a broad coalition of people working together for LGBTQ rights and religious liberty to visit the renovated temple. This is originally written by Tad Walsh, or Walsh, I think is actually how you pronounce his name. And again, the article was originally posted at Deseret News. So, Kensington, Maryland. Latter-day Saints sat peacefully with dozens of LGBTQ advocates in the celestial room of the Washington, D.C. temple last week during a special private tour of the church's holiest space, which normally is closed to the public. Now, that is actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about here. Not only is it normally closed to the public, but it's even normally closed to the Mormon laity, which is why it's incredibly interesting that there is a tour here being given to people who live directly contrarily to the Mormon scriptures. Now, I don't say this in any way to offend, but obviously you guys know my position on these matters. And even if it wasn't my position, you should know the Mormon position on these matters. Namely, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, also the Quran, right? Also the Sikh religious texts. Even Buddhism seems to have texts which suggest, for the most part, most people agree that homosexuality was not a good thing, right? Well, that's apparently not the case in most circles. I say apparently, although it's actually kind of obvious, right? We've all kind of known this for some time. But we see here that in a place where everyday Mormons are not allowed to tread, apparently homosexual leaders are. Very, very different world that we live in today than in 1995, for example. Perfect quiet is normal etiquette for a celestial room, but the LGBTQ leaders from across the country said the moments they shared in the temple with their friends from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints strengthened relationships that are actively working to beef up both gay rights and religious rights across the United States. Now, I don't really like the idea of group rights. Now, obviously, sometimes when people are saying group rights, like for example, a lot of times when we're saying religious rights, we're simply saying the rights of religious people. We're not saying a special set of rights that is given to religious people. But I think a lot of times in the modern age, people assume that there's your personal rights, but then there's also like these sets of group rights, these civil rights, gay rights, religious rights. I don't really like that idea. That being said, of course, there is some level of intersectionality between the people who advocate for certain agendas in the LGBTQ community, as well as people who advocate for certain agendas in the religious communities. Namely, the government getting off of our back, I think, is one of the easiest to discern areas of intersection. Um, I've often said before, excuse me, you guys are obviously going to hear it said here again. I don't understand why I, as a heterosexual male who married another adult heterosexual female, I don't understand why we need to ask the government permission to be married, which is effectively what a license is, right? That seems utterly ridiculous to me. It seems to me like, if anything, if there's any state involvement, it should be us telling the state, hey, actually, we're married, not them giving us permission to be married, right? That sounds to me like it's a matter between me and my wife, you and your potential spouse, right? It sounds like it is a um, issue that is between me and my congregation potentially, as they would be the marrying party. It sounds like it's an issue between me and God. It does not sound like it's an issue between me and the government, right? But a lot of the other areas where you would find quote unquote intersectionality, I don't necessarily think there is any. And we're going to get to some of those here in a moment. But, like, for example, when it comes to hate speech, right? Well, I don't think hate speech is a thing at all. So not only do I not believe I can work in tandem with the gay rights activists, but I don't think either side in that instance is actually doing a good thing. Frankly, people have the right, as much as I hate it, people have the right to insult my Jewish heritage, to insult my white skin, to insult my heterosexuality, to insult my Christianity. They have that right, right? Um, you may disagree with that, but frankly, you're welcome to that kind of a world. I don't want to live in it, right? At any rate, quote, we truly can have LGBTQ liberty and religious liberty together. And again, as far as that, as far as it goes into respecting everybody's human rights, I do think that that's obviously true, right? I don't think that anybody should have their human rights rejected on the basis that they are homosexual or heterosexual, or on the basis that they have a different religion than I do. These are not oppositional viewpoints, egg quote, said Angela Huey, president of One Community, a coalition seeking equal treatment for LGBTQ Arizonans. Latter-day Saint leaders in Arizona and multiple other states are part of a broad coalition of religious, government, business, and LGBTQ groups working together to pass new legislation in state houses and Congress. So, if you didn't know, across the country, especially in the West, but it's really everywhere, there is coalitions growing of the quote gay community and different religious communities. And I do emphasize different, because this is not just a melding of the secular with the religious, but it's also a melding of the religious with itself, right? We've covered here on this channel before the frequent alliance, or the frequent references to alliance, excuse me, coming from members of large Protestant groups like the World Council of Churches and the World Evangelical Community, right? Um, excuse me, and the Catholic Church, right? They're the alliance of those groups with the Catholic Church. We've also covered for quite some time the alliance of the different, quote, Abrahamic religions. We've covered for quite some time the World Alliance of Religions for Peace, which started in 2014 and who renews their alliance with each other once every September, which is a coalition of leaders from all different faith backgrounds. So not just your Abrahamics, but your Sikhs, your Buddhists, your Shinto, your Taoists, Zoroastrians, etc. We've been covering for some time the Pope's attempts at lining up with, pagans down in South America. And I mean, pagans as we colloquially understand it, right? Those who have traditional, typically animistic and polytheistic religious practices. There's been a lot of intra-religious linking with each other, and these same groups which are linking with each other are also linking with the secular world. And you can see that, I think, here in the form of this new alliance that's kind of propping up all over the country of gay leaders and religious leaders. Let me get a drink of my coffee here real quick. By the way, I see our good friend Kevin in the live chat. Shalom, and thank you very much for being here. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is if anybody has questions, very small, so we don't tend to get questions yet. But if anybody has questions, tag me at the Synagogue News. I'll record them all and answer them at the end. After last week's joint temple tour, the group sat down for lunch in the temple visitor center and listened to each other. Listening and understanding are keys to the coalition, Huey said, quote, what keeps us in conflict is that we don't understand one another. So when we meet each other in places of safety and equality, we're able to come together and learn about each other's history and culture, and it brings us together and creates a common bond of humanity, end quote, she said. Now, this isn't entirely accurate. It's not entirely wrong either. It's kind of a complicated issue. Because what we mean by conflict is going to vary from person to person. So I'll give an example. There's a YouTuber on here who is a atheist or pagan, I'm not sure which, but nonetheless is in that community, and also a progressive leftist, feminist, a queer person, though I don't know what spectrum or what position on the spectrum she occupies. But her name's Marty. You guys have probably seen her before because she has these conversations all the time, and I quite like Marty. I think that Marty's a very cool person. I like to talk to Marty. She strikes me as somebody who's honest. She's not dumb, and you know, so on and so forth, etc. There is no reason, in my opinion, for me and Marty to have physical conflict. There is no reason for me and Marty to have political conflict as it pertains to our rights, right? In other words, I want her to have all of her human rights given to her, and I want all of my human rights as well. And I don't think those things come into conflict, right? And so, in that sense, you can say, yeah, what keeps us in conflict is simply this inability to make friends across the aisle. I don't know if that's necessarily understanding one another per se, but perhaps knowing each other greater and understanding each other greater does create a greater sense of camaraderie, if only the camaraderie of, hey, we're both human beings, we're both Americans, and I would like to see you prosper as much as I'd like to see me prosper. But that isn't really what is meant by conflict here, is it? Right? The religious groups and the LGBTQ community are not in conflict in the sense that we fight each other, in the sense that we can't get along, in the case, or in the sense that you can't have fundamentalist Christians who are friends with gay people, right? That's not what we mean. What we mean by conflict in this instance is our disagreement on marriage, right? The religious community, at least for the most part, has always agreed it's not something that was necessarily Catholic specific, Protestant specific, Mormon specific, Muslim specific, tended to be general agreement. Hey, marriage is between a man and a woman. And that creates a great deal of offense in many people, right? Now, again, I believe that you can maintain a certain level of camaraderie in the sense that we're all from the same nation, a certain sense of camaraderie in the sense that we are all human beings, a certain sense of camaraderie in the sense that you can be friends with these people, and they should be friends with you, right? I don't think that the conflict that people are actually referencing should be going away, though, if I'm being frank. Um, unless it's going away in the sense that there is you know, all the gay people have, I guess, converted to being not gay, and of course I'm joking in that, right, because that's not exactly how it works. But the idea being that if you truly believe, morally speaking, that homosexuality is wrong, then you should say that, and you should stand by that. And obviously those people who truly believe that it isn't are going to stand by what they believe, and there's no reason for that particular conflict to end, frankly. There just isn't, unless that reason be, which this is going to obviously be an opinion that changes from either side, but unless that reason be that one or the other side is victorious, basically, right? Hopefully through persuasion, because I don't think that any other sort of victory is as far as, you know, being done by earthly folk is good, right? But nonetheless, I'm not interested in changing my opinions or weakening my opinions on marriage. Is basically the point I'm getting at, right? Um, I'm not interested in changing my opinions or weakening my opinions on the idea of, God's word being the final authority in moral matters. I'm just simply not. Um, with all of that being said, um, like I said, that doesn't mean that certain other elements can't be achieved here, like a friendship or something like that. Um, but at any rate, I just think it's not honest to say, hey, this is going to end all conflict between religious people, because the conflict that they're referencing, the way that they mean it, doesn't exist, and the actual one that they're referencing will not end so long as there are people who genuinely believe that their respective scriptures are true. I hope I'm making sense to you guys. I'm kind of like exhausted because I haven't slept properly in a year. But, I didn't do a show yesterday. I'm trying to do these at least twice a week, so I figured we'll do a makeup one today. Um, hope it's all doing good, but it's not going to be as good a quality as others, I admit. 2 months ago, the coalition introduced a bill that would both strengthen religious liberty in the state while offering important new housing, employment, and public accommodation protections for LGBTQ people. Full stop. That should not be a thing. Full stop. There should not be any public accommodations. There should not be any employment accommodations. There should not be any housing accommodations for any specific group. Okay. Affirmative action is nonsense. If you're a football fan, the Rooney Rule, nonsense. It's stupid. Okay. Now, I don't think that discriminating against people is a good thing either, right? But we already have anti-discrimination laws. We don't need to create special accommodations for people. Okay. That's just not how it works. That's just simply not how it works. So that's the first reason why this should not happen. The second reason this should not happen is because those two things should not be in the same bill. That is a dishonest tactic on the part of politicians. A bill should address a issue, and that is it. The one issue. And then you should vote on the one issue. And if you have a different issue you'd like to address, then you should draft a different bill and then vote on that issue, right? This is a very common thing that happens in the United States. It's a very common thing, I'm sure, that happens in other, countries with electorates. Basically, people will say, "Hey, this is our the NDAA, perfect example of this. This is our budget for national defense in 2022. But also, here's a law about carbon emissions that we're going to just throw in there." Wait a minute, those aren't the same thing. Why are you creating this 10,000 page legislation, which in some cases it's not even an exaggeration, my friends? Longer than most books, legislation filled with a whole bunch of unrelated crap. Then nobody reads it. They just pass it because of what the headline says, right? And now we have ridiculous laws on the books that literally nobody even knew were going to happen. And the ones who did know it was going to happen are typically dishonest people who wanted some of these negative things to happen. And again, the NDAA is a perfect example of this. Every year they add some new pretentious crap. They call it pork. That's the slang term, right? Into these bills that have nothing to do with national defense whatsoever, or very tentatively, and tend to use national defense as an excuse. So that's the second reason this shouldn't happen. Reason number one, there should not be special accommodations for any group of people. Reason number two, these two things need to be addressed in two separate bills, two separate pieces of legislation. And reason number three, frankly, I just don't see the relation. Even if we were to agree you can add multiple topics into one bill, they should at least be related topics, right? We shouldn't have a bill that says, hey, we should legalize marijuana in the state of Idaho, and also you can't ride a giraffe on Tuesdays. That doesn't make any sense. By the way, the whole you can't ride a giraffe on a certain day thing, that's actually a real law in the books in Idaho. I didn't make that up. But at any rate, there should be two different bills, right? They're not even remotely the same issue. They're not even close to the same issue. So not only should two separate issues be two separate pieces of legislation, but on top of that, even if we were to be generous and say, okay, two different issues which are related could be addressed in the same piece of legislation, these two issues are not related. They're not the same thing. And so that whole paragraph there is, in my opinion, just an example of legislative failure on the part of these state legislatures, in this particular case, Arizona. A day before the joint temple tour, the coalition published an open letter asking people to support similar future legislation in Georgia. The signatories included rabbis and leaders from Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Muslim, and evangelical congregations, as well as Latter-day Saint Area 70. Ooh, I'm sure you can kind of see why I'm reading this article now, huh? This isn't just the Mormons allowing people to take a tour of their celestial room, which laity in the Mormon church are not allowed to do. So homosexual leaders can do it. Laity in the Mormon church can't do it. Not just them, but Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians. Those are all Protestants, aren't they? Muslims. Oh, ain't that interesting? As well as, of course, the Latter-day Saint Area 70. What do we constantly harp on here on the Watchdog? The union of religions is fast approaching. Guess what, friends? If we're going to include the nones as one of those religions, which we all do, they're going to have a seat at that table as well. And I don't think there should be this kind of alliance between any of these different groups. I'm just simply making the point. When we see religious leaders teaming up with atheist groups or religious nones, like, for example, the LGBTQ agendas, or community, I should say, that's nothing different than what we've already been seeing, and which people seemingly seem or want to forget and put out of their mind. Methodists and Presbyterians and Episcopalians and evangelicals are all on board with this too. And you want to know who else is? Rabbis. You want to know who else is? Muslims. Guess what? Go to the international prayer that took place at Baha'is, Druze, Yazidis, Mandaeans. Go to the World Alliance of Religions for Peace, Taoists, Confucianists, Buddhists, Shinto, Zoroastrians. Go to the Amazonian Synod 2019, pagans, meaning folk religions, right? The traditional religions of certain groups of people that typically take an animist and polytheistic nature. It's the way of the world, friends. This is where we're moving, and it is where we are currently. The Arizona bill contains religious liberty protections similar to Utah's 2015 Fairness for All law that passed with the support of Latter-day Saint senior leadership. The Deseret News editorial board recently described this as an eye-popping example of different interests working together to hammer out difficult compromises. Utah's law bans discrimination against LGBTQ people in housing and employment. The Arizona proposal would ban discrimination in public accommodations. Some restaurants in the state turn away would-be gay and transgender couples, for example. Now, I don't actually believe that, to be honest with you, but uncomfortable opinion, you have that right, actually. If it's your place of business, you have the right to tell people that. I mean, how many people have seen the sign, we will refuse service for any reason, right? Or some variation thereof. You have that right. Now, look, if you want to be in Jackson, Mississippi and not serve black people, well, you're welcome to have a collapsing business. That's totally on you, right? But you ain't gonna last very long. But nonetheless, I do believe, controversially, that people actually do have the right with their own property to do as they see fit, and that includes with things like whether or not I'm going to serve somebody. But I doubt that that's even actually taking place in Utah. The other thing, though, that's important to point out here is when it comes to things like, notice it's LGBT. I want to emphasize that for a moment. Sorry. Discrimination in public accommodations. Yeah, you should use the bathroom of your birth gender. That isn't discriminatory. It's obvious. Okay? Or what about employment? Hey, I have I don't know, say, um, what would be a good example here? Oh, here's a perfect example, actually. I have a teaching job open, a PE coach job open for a girls' volleyball team, young girls' volleyball team. Maybe it's a woman's only position, but now here comes a man who thinks he's a woman. Hey, you can't discriminate against people in employment. I'm sorry, yes, I can, and in that instance, I should. Give you another example. I have a religious university, Liberty University, for example. I want to teach people from a strictly fundamentalist viewpoint. That's what this college is. It is a fundamentalist Christian college. Should I be discriminating against hiring Catholics, Muslims, Mormons, atheists? Obviously, I should. It's not even a question. It's not even a question. And by the way, notice here, it would also ban conversion therapy. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just simply a violation of people's freedoms. Conversion therapy, everybody wants to suggest that conversion therapy is people like pinning down gays to the white hospital beds and shocking them and giving them lobotomies and all that kind of stuff. It ain't the case. It ain't the case. It hasn't been the case since the 1940s, which, by the way, in the 1940s, they were coincidentally doing that to everybody else who they thought had a mental disorder. So it's not like it was a specific gay persecution, right? But at any rate, you know what conversion therapy includes? In fact, what it most commonly is talking to your pastor, talking to a counselor, talking to somebody who believes that in some way, shape, or form this can be changed, that you can turn your behavior away from homosexual lifestyle. Whether or not you agree with the effectuality of that, people have the right to do that. People have the right to confide in their pastors, in their parents, in their teachers, in their counselors, an uncomfortable feeling in them that they would like to change. They have that right. You don't get to take that right away from them. This is not increasing liberties for LGBTQ people. It is decreasing liberties for LGBTQ people. If I, as a 24-year-old man, have homosexual tendencies and want to go see a counselor about that, that is my right as an adult man. And you don't get to take that away from me. But that's what they would like to do in banning conversion therapy. Friends, if you don't believe me, just look at the Wikipedia page on this. Wikipedia is a very liberal website, by the way. And they list all the different examples of conversion therapy, right? It includes counseling, and it includes talking to religious leaders. It includes visualization, psychoanalytic therapy, spiritual intervention. But no, that's apparently a violation of your rights as a homosexual person. Yes, giving you the ability to seek counseling on your own free will is a violation of your liberties. But telling you you're not legally allowed to do that, not a violation of your liberties. Thus saith the law, which apparently evangelical leaders and Presbyterian leaders and Catholic leaders and Jewish leaders and Muslim leaders and Mormon leaders all support. In fact, Utah already banned conversion therapy in 2020 with the support of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, says the next sentence. Quote, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints opposes conversion therapy and our therapists do not practice it, end quote. Marty Stevens, the faith's director of government and community relations, said while the ban was under debate. Equality Arizona executive director Michael Soto said that he and Huey are calling the Equality and Fairness Coalition plans to introduce similar legislation in 9 other states over the next year. It plans to use the model in Congress too, which so far is considering both the Equality Act and the Fairness for All Act, both of which are utterly detestable, in my personal opinion. Utterly detestable, in my personal opinion. By the way, I see Nicholas, excuse me, is here in the live chat. Shalom, and thank you very much for being here. Let me go ahead and get a drink of my coffee here real quick. This coalition that we have appearing before us has real political power. And that's because when you get all the different faith groups together, I mean, you don't know what kind of political power, and maybe some of you do, some of you who are students of history, but the majority of people who watch this are not going to know what kind of political power religion actually holds because we've lived in a secular society now for, geez, 1788 is when the Constitution was signed. So we don't recognize here in the States just how powerful religious persuasion actually is. But when you have the religious mandate, the divine mandate, especially if that divine mandate is on every side, people are going to toe the line very quickly. By the way, I don't believe they actually have the divine mandate, just to be clear in my terminology here. God is clear on what he says is right and not, right? Regardless, well, I don't know. I wanted to repeat myself. Maybe it's worthy of repeating, though. Church leaders, we just saw earlier, it's not just Mormon leaders, Protestant evangelical leaders are supporting the removal of one's ability to hire only Christians in a Christian business, to hire only biological women in a woman-only business, or to allow a homosexual person to seek counseling because they don't want to be homosexual, or even spiritual advice. Coalition members also are shepherding city ordinances modeled after the same legislation. Last year, 16 North Carolina cities adopted municipal ordinances that NBC News called historic LGBTQ non-discrimination laws. One of the leaders behind the effort joined the tour of the Latter-day Saint Temple, Kendra Johnson, executive director of Equality North Carolina. Quote, "This partnership to me makes it clear that we have differences of opinion," Johnson said. "I'm not seeking as a person who's LGBTQ or a person who's working in this area of our rights to change church doctrine, but we can work together for basic human rights to ensure fairness for all," end quote. She, of course, says that, but then goes on and supports things like banning conversion therapy, hate speech things, and saying that you're not allowed to, quote, discriminate in your hiring practices. And again, I'm sorry, but if I have a Christian business, I have the right to hire only Christians and people who adhere to Christian morality. If I have a female only group, I have the right to hire only biological females. And by the way, those qualifiers are not even really necessary because it's my business. I have the right to do what I want with my business so long as I am not directly victimizing another or infringing upon their liberties, right? But that's what we're talking about here. She said Latter-day Saints support for the coalition shows religious people that there is a way forward where people don't have to choose between religious liberty or LGBTQ rights, which of course is hilarious because they are literally talking about the diminishing of religious liberties. Again, see banning of conversion therapy. Again, see banning of, quote, discrimination in hiring practices. Quote, "I think that the church has taken a position that is extremely helpful," she said. "There is another way for us to approach this where people can be treated with basic human dignity and have all the goods and services that we should have as people who are part of this country without forcing the church to become something like the church is not comfortable being," end quote. And again, nobody here is suggesting that homosexuals should not have basic human rights. I don't know of any. I'm sure some have existed, especially in the past. But as of right now, today, I don't know of anybody, sans the Steven Andersons of the world, who believe that gay people don't deserve human liberties, right? We all recognize we live in a country that does not have, religious enforcement. Of course, I guess some people might disagree with what I just said, but that's probably a conversation for another time, or at least a conversation that should be between me and the person who disagrees, is what I mean to say. The tour of the temple appeared to buttress the coalition's efforts to work together. Quote, "We met together in this place of true shared humanity with the core values of LGBTQ liberty and religious liberty walking together," Huey said. The Washington, D.C. temple has been closed to the general public for 48 years. 48 years, the Mormon laity who believe Joseph Smith is a prophet, who believe Moroni is an angel, who believe the Book of Mormon is scripture, cannot actually show up in the celestial room, but gay leaders get to. Sorry if that bothers you, that bothers me, but it bothers me. The Church of the Church of Jesus Christ recently completed a renovation and is hosting a scheduled 6-week open house that begins Thursday. Over the previous 2 weeks, apostles and other church leaders and representatives have provided private tours to invited guests. The tour and subsequent meeting were special for Equality Arizona Soto, who grew up as a Latter-day Saint. And it just kind of goes on to talk about a few of the things, their personal opinions and all that. You guys can obviously read the rest of the article. I'll post it in the live chat for you guys. All right, how long have we been going so far? Oh, it looks like Brother Nicholas said he's going to have to leave us, actually. That is all right, brother. I appreciate you being here for the time that you were. How much time have I been going thus far? Let's see. It's not actually telling me. That's weird. There we go. 48 minutes. All right. So let's move on to our next article here. Still got some very interesting stuff to talk about. And the next thing that we're going to go ahead and talk about is the headliner. Anti-capitalist wokesters are all in on Disney. Yeah, that's right. The wokies, those who apparently say capitalism is bad and being a billionaire is stupid and monopolies are evil and blah, 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 are super duper down with Disney, and with Disney having special corporate rights given to it, specifically having its own little city district. Yeah, you may not know, but Disneyland is kind of its own little city. Not exactly, but sort of. They have their own fire department. I believe they have their own little police center. They have their own tax district. And I believe they are even tax exempt, if I remember correctly. But this article will be jogging our memory here. So let's go ahead and read this article and see just how consistent our Wokey friends are. Let's go ahead and pull this up here. Disney's special district tells investors that the state cannot dissolve it without paying debt. It's from the Miami Herald. Again, Disney's special district tells investors that the state cannot dissolve it without paying off its debt. This is from Mary Ellen Klass, writing originally from the Herald Times, but this was actually published in, published in the Miami Herald when I found it, which is actually where we are getting this from. As Florida legislators, were rushing through passage of a bill to repeal the special district that governs Walt Disney World last week, they failed to notice an obscure provision in the state law that says the state could not do what legislators were doing unless the district's bond debt was paid off. Disney, however, noticed, and the Randy Creek Improvement District quietly sent a note to its investors to show that it was confident the legislature's attempt to dissolve the special taxing district operating the 39 square mile parcel it owned in two counties, violated the pledge the state made when it enacted the district in 1967 and therefore was not legal. The result, Randy Creek told its investors, is that it would continue to go about its business as usual. Yes, they're just going to violate the law as it has been passed. That's just an absolutely brilliant thing to do, right? And of course, here we have the Miami Herald just outright endorsing this and supporting this. And go on to your local social media website, or look up Disney in Google and go to the news tab, and you'll find that this is actually what the majority of woke people are supporting. The majority of the media are supporting. The majority of the Democratic politicians are supporting. It's almost like their anti-capitalist views are really anti-you views. See, they don't want you to have their money, but they really like it when they have your money. The statement, posted on the website of the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board on April 21st by the Randy Creek Improvement District, is the only public statement Disney has supplied since lawmakers unleashed their fury over the company's vocal opposition to the Parental Rights in Education law, also known as the, quote, "Don't Say Gay" bill, end quote. The statement, first reported by WESH2, quotes the statute, which says in part that the state of Florida pledges it will not limit or alter the rights of the district until all such bonds, together with interest therein, are fully met and discharged. Now, notice, of course, that there are these little dots. I can't remember exactly what the name for that is, but basically it means there's missing information. That's the first thing you have to know. Second thing you have to know here is that what this is actually saying is that it's not going to limit or alter the rights of the districts until the bonds are paid. It doesn't say that the state has to pay them. So in other words, Disney pays off what it needs to pay off, and then they move on with their lives. That is actually legal according to the wording that we have laid out here. Randy Creek's statement says, quote, in light of the state of Florida's pledge to the district's bondholders, Randy Creek expects to explore its options while continuing its present operations, including levying and collecting its ad valorem taxes and collecting its utility revenues, paying debt service on its ad valorem tax bonds and utility revenue bonds, complying with its bond covenants, and operating and maintaining its properties, end quote. In essence, the state had a contractual obligation not to interfere with the district until the bond debt is paid off, said Jake Schumer, a municipal attorney in the Maitland law firm of Shepard Smith, Kohlmeyer, and Hand, in an article for Bloomberg Tax posted on Tuesday and cited in a Law and Crime article. There's DeSantis right there. I don't know how I feel about DeSantis, if I'm being honest with you. He does a lot of good things, but he also kind of gives me the creeps, and I haven't figured out why. But yeah, I don't know if I trust him. I got to be honest with you. But anyways, the law passed by the Republican legislature on a largely party line vote. Party line vote. Democrats down with Disney. Not down with big business, but Disney apparently doesn't count. Now, not to say that Disney isn't a big business, right? Because Disney is the largest film business, really the largest entertainment company in the entire world, or even in the history of the world. Think of whatever it is that you enjoy. You like Disney? Well, obviously that's owned by Disney. You like Pixar? Well, obviously that's owned by Disney. You like Fox? So, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Futurama, any of that kind of stuff. New Girl. Hey, guess what? That's owned by Disney. You like Star Wars? Lucasfilm is owned by Disney, which means Indiana Jones is also owned by Disney, and American Graffiti is also owned by Disney. What about Marvel? You like Marvel? Guess what? Disney. Man. Planet of the Apes? Oh, what do you know? That's Disney. Chronicles of Narnia? Disney. Lord of the Rings? Disney. Who owns Halo? Disney. Who owns Nickelodeon? Disney. Disney, 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 Disney. Did I mention Disney? Yeah, they own everything. They're as clear a monopoly as you can possibly get, and eventually they'll be buying out Viacom, Universal, Warner Brothers. I personally think anyway. I mean, they already did it with Fox. I thought that was going to be struck down actually, but that's actually the moment that I learned that the Wokies really don't mind if their companies take control. To be honest with you, I thought it was going to be a little bit more self-destructive than that, but they're a little bit more intelligent than I gave them credit for. So, here we are. It simply can't go forward under the contract clause, he said. They would have to pass something to address this. Schumer noted that the bill dissolving Reedy Creek doesn't say what should happen to his debts, but another state law requires that by default, the county assumes a district debt along with all of its assets when it is dissolved. Quote, this means that theoretically, Orange and Osceola counties will inherit upwards of $1 billion in bond debt, end quote, he wrote in the Bloomberg Tax article. Continuing. After the governor signed the Randy Creek repeal into law on Friday, the governor's office released a statement indicating that more details are forthcoming. Quote, in the near future, we will propose additional legislation to authorize additional special districts in a manner that ensures transparency and an even playing field under the law, end quote, the statement read. It would be up to the legislature to take any action. On Tuesday, the governor called a special legislative session to address property insurances for the week of May 23rd. However, the proclamation did not include the Randy Creek Improvement District. Neither the governor's office nor spokespersons for the House Speaker or Senate President would respond to requests for comment about how it intended to resolve this legal conflict. When the state established the Randy Creek Improvement District in 1967 as an independent taxing district controlled by Walt Disney World, I'm going to say that again, as an independent taxing district controlled by Walt Disney World. Talk about giving power to corporations. Anyways, it gave it the power to build roads, sewers, and utilities, as well as the authority to set its zoning laws, establish its police and fire departments, and regulate constructions. I'm going to repeat this again because a lot of people on the opposing side of us would like you to believe that they are anti-corporation. So let me just go ahead and reiterate for you guys what these guys are supporting, what rights these guys are supporting giving to one of the largest, if not the largest, entertainment corporation in the history of the world. They want them to have the power to build roads. They want them to have the power to build sewers and utilities. They want them to have the power to set their own zoning laws, to establish local police and fire departments, and to regulate construction. That sounds like its own little city, doesn't it? Kind of interesting. The district can borrow money by issuing bonds to pay for services, and that infrastructure, excuse me. And while Disney must also pay property taxes to Orange and Osceola counties, the state also allows the Reedy Creek Improvement District to tax itself, so they can, establish police, establish fire departments, have their own zoning laws, and even set their own taxes. Is that not insane? These people would like you to believe that they're anti-corporation. These people would like you to believe that they're anti-capitalist, that they don't like billionaires. Really, they don't like you having billions or millions or hundreds of thousands. They don't like you being capitalistic. They don't like you having your own private business. What do they like? Google? Do they like Disney? Do they like Apple or Facebook or Twitter? Perfectly fine with those ones. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Twitter's owned by Elon Musk now, so we're not fine with that anymore. But we were just a couple of days ago. The current tax rate is 3 times higher than the maximum amount allowed by cities and counties, Schumer said. Proponents of the bill had some misconceptions that Disney's getting special property tax break for Reedy Creek, said Scott Randolph, Orange County tax collector. He says it's not, even though we literally just read that it was, but why would we expect an article in the media to be honest? In fact, the theme parks of Universal Studios and SeaWorld, which operate under dependent taxing districts, have more tax advantages than Disney because, quote, if those taxing districts didn't exist, that money would otherwise go to Orange County's general revenue, end quote, Randolph said. I don't really understand how that gives them a greater tax advantage. Perhaps I'm just ignorant and somebody would have to explain that to me. But it seems to me like having the right to tax people yourself and, set up all your own different separate stuff. I don't understand how that would somehow be less advantageous less advantageous, excuse me, than your tax revenue going to Orange County. That doesn't make any sense to me. And again, maybe I'm just ignorant. He agrees with Schumer that the only way for the state to dissolve Disney's special district is for the debt to be assumed by the county government. Quote, Orange County gets Reedy Creek's assets, debts, and obligations, end quote, he said. But the cost of providing its services is $105 million a year, and the cost of its debt service is $58 million a year. And so, if Reedy Creek is dissolved, those assets and liabilities would be absorbed by Orange County's $600 million budget, he said. Quote, unless they want to cut services and cut spending everywhere, they're going to, which would be my recommendation, by the way. Disney should be operating as a private company or not at all. If they want to have their own, special little city, I'm sorry, we got rid of the whole idea of company towns back in the early 1900s. Unless they want to cut services and cut spending elsewhere, not elsewhere, but here, they're going to have to find a way to absorb 163 million, end quote, Randolph said. Notice he completely leaves out the possibility that you cut spending here. No, you have to cut it elsewhere. No, I'm going to cut it for you. You don't need your own police service. The local police service can handle it. You don't need to set up your own zoning laws. They can be whatever zoning laws happen to exist in the county in which you reside. He estimates the average increase in taxes would be $200 to $250 per year for the median household until the bonds are paid off. That's not actually terribly much, $200 to $250 per year. But nonetheless, you wouldn't have to raise taxes, in my opinion. You just have to, again, cut some of the money that's going towards Disney. Quote, by dissolving Reedy Creek, the legislature essentially rewrote the promises made in the district's bond offerings, end quote, Schumer wrote. Quote, instead of bonds packed by a special district with the power to levy up to $30 million in taxes, the property tax bonds will be backed jointly by two governments that can only generate a maximum of $10 million in taxes, end quote. The mileage rate means $10 per thousand, or $10 per $1,000 in taxable property value rather than $30 per thousand. Quote, Governor Ron DeSantis responded to the criticism that repealing Disney's special district would become a burden for area's residents. Quote, some people are trying to say somehow that they would get a tax break out of not having their special district, end quote, he said Monday at a news conference. Quote, trust me, under no circumstances will Disney not pay its fair share in taxes, end quote. He added that Disney will also be required to pay all outstanding bonds, but he didn't explain how it will happen. He didn't explain how this nearly $1 trillion company is going to manage to pay their to pay their debts. It's insane that anybody wants to give any sort of tax break whatsoever to a company this large. Randolph calls the measure the No Lawyer Left Behind Act and predicts that there will be many lawsuits, including one from bondholders alleging the state illegally impaired the contract. Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings told reporters Thursday that if Reedy Creek were to be entirely dissolved, it would be catastrophic for his county's budget. Demings, the former county sheriff, noted that the district reimburses the sheriff's office for any services rendered, including for the two tiny municipalities controlled by Disney that were created at the same time as Reedy Creek, Bay Lake, and Lake Buena Vista. In the current fiscal year, Bay Lake is paying nearly $11 million to the sheriff's office, and Lake Buena Vista is poised to pay $3 million. I don't understand why that would change if they didn't have a special taxing district. If they're still utilizing the same services, then they would still have to pay that money, it seems to me. But again, I could be ignorant. Quote, if that district goes away and they no longer pay for those public safety costs, it then has to fall to the county's other budgets. That's a net sum loss for the rest of the taxpayers of Orange County when we already have significant pressure on our county budget to provide for public safety, end quote, Demings said. So what are the options for untangling the mess? Quote, they could try to argue that this pledge was invalid and they could not contract it away, end quote, Schumer said. I don't think that would work, but states usually aren't in the business of arguing that their promises are bad. The state could also pass a different law which acknowledges Disney's right to the bonds and then takes the asset using its eminent domain powers and pays off the bondholders using those assets, he said. But that poses another problem for the state, Randolph said. By giving Disney a year to resolve this, the company could shed its asset by giving its power plant and its water utilities to Lake Buena Vista and Bay Lake. Without those assets, Disney reduces its tax bill when the state dissolves Reedy Creek, he said. Quote, Disney has more power on now to determine its tax bill than it did a week ago, end quote, he said. Quote, that's what's crazy to me. They want to punish Disney, but this is the furthest thing from that. You literally put them in the driver's seat of how much they want to pay, end quote, which is, of course, why they all want it to not be the case. I find that incredibly funny, right? They're like, hey, no, you're actually helping Disney, don't you know? And then the argument is, therefore, don't do it. Why don't do it? Why don't you want us to do it, even though you're on the pro-Disney side and apparently doing it would be helping Disney? Maybe it's because you realize that you're full of crap and it's not moving forward with the dissolving of Reedy Creek that would actually benefit Reedy Creek. Representative Randy Fine, the Palm Bay Republican who sponsored the bill, suggested to legislators that the state could require and create a municipal service taxing unit to replace the Reedy Creek Improvement District and use that to collect taxes to provide service and pay the debt. Randolph said that that won't be easy because state law prohibits a county from creating a municipal service taxing unit without approval of the municipalities, involved. Will Lake Buena Vista and Bay Lake approve? He asked. They could, but why would they? Disney's in the driver's seat one more time. End quote. He says. And Disney's so in the driver's seat that they would like to convince you not to do this, even though they're on the side of Disney. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, that's all the time we have, friends. It's been about an hour, so I'm done here. If you guys appreciated this program, definitely give it a thumbs up. Comment down there in the comment section below with any comments, criticisms, critiques, anything of that nature. Definitely consider subscribing if you have not done so. Definitely consider hitting that bell to get notified every time we go live, which is supposed to be every Tuesday and Thursday, Lord willing. And also, if you would like to follow us on any social media platforms, I am on Gab, I am on Parler, and I am on Minds. I am also on Facebook and Twitter. So if you'd like to follow me on any of those, you certainly can do so. And I greatly do appreciate you doing so. Also, if you'd like to help me turn this into a career, you can help do that by either giving a one-time donation of whatever amount you see fit to the PayPal, or you can give a subscription, again, any amount that you see fit to the Patreon. Please, if you do think that this is important information, as of right now, this is nothing but a net loss for me, right? It's a net loss as far as time. It's a net loss as far as it's a net loss as far as like stress and stuff like that, right? I just end up getting more stressed out. Net loss as far as money, because I don't actually make any money from this whatsoever. And obviously, if it's not deserved, then the money should not be coming in. But if you do believe it's deserved, please do consider giving. It does look like the PayPal actually just posted twice rather than the PayPal and the Patreon, so I apologize for that. But nonetheless, links there in the description, and please do give with trepidation if you do give at all. With that said, friends, I'm out of here. Want to remind you guys to be watchdogs, and want to go ahead and say to everybody here, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise